Hello, and welcome back to our twice a month semi-bi-monthly podcast, A Musician and a
Nailed it.
Filmmaker. We've come to the filmmaking part of the two-sided coin that is our podcast. And the movie that I selected this month, in response to, originally I was going to pick a whole thing with Orson Welles, and it was like mixed media with like a narrative feature and a documentary about editing the feature. So it was a whole thing, and it was like Orson Welles' last movie, and it was going to be this whole thing. But then Jordan said a Canadian post-grunge album, which I'm like, well, that doesn't fit at all. But I can think of a movie I wanted to rewatch and talk about recently, which was The Dirties, which is an independent film by a filmmaker named Matt Johnson and his friends. So Matt Johnson is a Canadian. As I said, he is also known for started as a web series and then became a television series on Vice Canada called Nirvana, the Band, the Show, which Nirvana is spelled with two N's, or so 3 N's technically if you count the one in the beginning. So legally distinct, I guess. But he is sort of like a punk rock filmmaker in terms of like he doesn't really ask for permission when he wants to shoot things, and he doesn't, or at least when he was at the $10,000 budget range, it was just more like go into a place and shoot, and if anyone asks any questions, you just tell them it's a student project. Better to ask for or beg for forgiveness than ask for permission, kind of. But it's not even just in like the practicality of shooting a movie, but also in like the way that it's structured and like the style of it. So yeah. We should quickly say what the premise is. The movie is about two teenagers that are bullied in high school, even though they're played by 28-year-old men. Just ignore that part. And they labeled this gang of bullies that are pretty horribly physically abusive to these guys. I don't think it ever like. I think the worst it gets is like Owen gets a rock thrown at his head and it breaks the skin, but still pretty bad for, as far as bullying. Like the worst bullying I think I ever encountered in all my years in public school was probably just verbal. But anyway, so they want to make a movie for their film class about these two guys who get revenge on their bullies by, shooting them and killing them, which, okay, for a movie within a movie, that's pretty racy. But then the way that this movie progresses is that it's sort of like it starts as an idea like, oh, haha, it's just a joke. Like we're making a movie where we play the heroes and the villains, and we kill the bullies, we kill the bad guys. But then it sort of evolves into a point where Owen, the like straight man character, sort of gradually realizing that Matt is like kind of crazy and he's not entirely joking. If like he still wants to make a movie, but he is going to probably bring a gun to school and kill some people. And spoiler alert, he does. So it's definitely from the premise not the most attractive idea for a film to just your general audiences. You tell someone it's a movie about a school shooting, they're going to expect something like Basketball Diaries or some of the other more gruesome and I don't want to say that they glorify the violence, but they don't really give you the chance to not, and the way that it's presented and directed, if that makes sense.
You're talking about The Dirties glorifying the violence?
No, I'm saying the other movies.
The other movies?
That have like school shootings in them. Like, I can see how if the Columbine kids did see Basketball Diaries and use that as part of their inspiration for, what they did, and the lives they took. I mean, I don't think it's that. Again, this movie does bring up a whole discussion about, like thematically, it brings up the discussion between like the influence that pop culture has on the youth and like using it as a scapegoat for when these tragedies are committed and these atrocities by, people that could have just been mentally ill and had some sort of break, and it doesn't necessarily have to define them as a person, despite that being the case in the eyes of the public. The eyes of the public, because they don't know anything about this person, that they're just going to call him a monster. And I'm kind of paraphrasing Matt Johnson, the director, when he's talked about the movie, but it does seem to take a lot more of an understanding, an empathetic approach, and the way that the main character is characterized. He's not just like portrayed to be like this stereotypical, archetypical outcast. I mean, I think it's obvious from watching the movie that he is, but like, I think it's like almost in a way where like if circumstances were different, like if he was able to hang and not be so like obsessive with making movies all the time. 'Cause here's how he described it earlier. He said that his friend pitched the movie to him as make a movie where you're a psychotic killer, but everything else about you is exactly the same. So this is basically like almost an autobiography, and that's what makes the faux documentary style, the mockumentary, if you will, so interesting in this case, is because the lines that it blurs are like so, like it's not like the black and white, the gray between the black and white is so gray that it's really just like you almost end up like in a way that you sympathize with Owen for being an abused child, essentially. I mean, I know he's an adult playing a child, or Matt, both of them, they both get bullied. In the way that you sympathize with them, you also remember what it was like to be in that position on the side of being bullied, or maybe you remember what it was like to be a bully. I mean, I'm not going to make assumptions about people the way that the media does about the troubled youth and their slip-ups. But it's a good thing we're not monetized, because there's no way this would be.
No.
And it's interesting that this is also a Canadian film that was shot before Sandy Hook happened. So they were basing everything they were going on with the characterization in this movie on Columbine and not any of the, let's call it the new wave of American school violence, which, I mean, Sandy Hook was basically the start of. But I think there's also a big difference between shooting two kids in a hallway with a pistol and trapping, 21 7-year-olds in a bathroom and just firing an assault rifle through the door. And then having some crazy lunatic down in Austin go on and tell people that you're a crisis actor and there wasn't really a killing and all this stuff. But that's real life, and this is thankfully a movie, and no one actually died.
Well, that's what's so interesting about
Let me just say real
movie.
quick, they do have a scene where they go out and shoot guns in the quarry, and I'm like, man,
Yes.
I hope those are blanks, or that they actually had some safety guy there telling them where and where not to point, because they're firing those pistols really liberally, really close to each other.
Yeah, I doubt it.
I really hope that those are blanks or airsoft or something that isn't lethal, because, I mean, ooh.
Well, I think they're real guns, because like you see those watermelons blowing up and everything, like, unless they put, explosives, and it feels like based on the kind of movie and the guerrilla filmmaking that is the entire
probably
film.
is. It's probably super dangerous. Like the scene where he's standing on the side of the cliff. I'm sure he's actually standing on the side of a really tall cliff and could probably die if he fucks up while he's improvising.
I have a lot to talk about that cliff, by the way. I don't know if I should get into it now or later, but
have you been to that cliff?
One of my music videos is shot on that cliff.
No shit.
Music video for Your Sanity is on that cliff.
That's great.
Yeah, cut to the clip.
So did you beat them to that location? Or is that
no? It's a coincidence. Like it's a pretty fucking popular spot around here.
Well,
to
yeah,
film
it's
stuff.
like the bridge in Atlanta where everyone gets the shot of the skyscrapers and all that. It's like the one bridge. If you go to that bridge, pretty much any time of like day, especially when you get closer to golden hour, literally like you have to like squeeze your way in just to get an uninterrupted view of the thing if you want to get a shot with your camera or a really tall tripod, I guess. But
so
yeah.
that cliff, it's an area called the Scarborough Bluffs, and that you can't. You're
gotta
not
say,
supposed
it's not
to
as
go.
good of a name as Goose Bay.
No.
Anyway,
It was already
not supposed
taken.
to go up there.
You're not supposed to go right up to the edge of the cliff. Like they have, fences and stuff, and it's like, you could get fined if you cross over the fence and stuff like that. But if you go there at any given time, there's like a whole fucking like the same shit you're talking about. There's like easily like 10 to 20 people just like lined up right at the edge of the cliff, like taking photos.
I can imagine that's like a great place to go and watch the sunset, which is kind of what the scene in the movie is. I mean, it wasn't a great sunset, but it was enough that you could tell that it was that time of day.
Totally. It's always a gamble, in Toronto, what kind of weather you're going to get. But that cliff though, it's actually a terrible idea to go there and watch a sunset because it has collapsed a couple times. Like it's right at like the water. So
Well, what if you stand behind the fence? Is it still good enough of a view?
it's not as good enough of it. People want to get like right up there. It's not good
It's
for the
worth
photos
risking your life. I mean, come on.
It's worth. Hey, I shot the music video standing right on the edge of the cliff, and we saw other people like. I'm not gonna say that they were necessarily Karens, but there was like ladies with bob cuts in the parking lot, making calls and pointing at us. So I can only assume that they were alerting
You just add
the authorities.
the fine onto the budget of the music video, so it goes from like $15 to $1,500.
Yeah, I was the one paying.
It's only $1,000 American, so I mean,
worth it. But the funny thing is that so we shot my friend Adrian Patterson, filmmaker extraordinaire, shot that, and literally like 2 days later, we found out that fucking chunk that I was standing on fell off. Like it was like 2 days later.
Thanks a lot, Jordan. Thanks for interfering with nature.
I don't think it was me. I think it's a natural occurring thing. That's why they have the fence there, because like it's the bottom of those bluffs hits the lake, and the lake is constantly eroding the bottom portion of it. And there's a beach down at the bottom there where I actually shot a sick music video for another artist, and that area also you're not supposed to go on because like basically the whole cliff, like if it falls, it topples like onto that area. So they have people like patrolling it every now and again. We did shoot some stuff at the bottom of the cliff as well for the Your Sanity video, and I think we were told to leave. Like they have some people walking up and down that part. They're like, hey, you guys, like, it happens like probably 1,000 times a day. Like everyone's taking photos or shooting music videos there. But yeah, outside of that though, that Scarborough Bluffs, that cliff shot there, that is one of the most pivotal moments in the movie. And if we're in the spoiler-free zone now,
I dropped the biggest spoiler in the intro.
We're in spoiler zone now. Then I will gladly go ahead and say this, because I've not ever watched like any, I don't know, like film analysis videos for this movie, or like I've not seen the director's commentary, or I haven't really even heard anything being said about it by any of the cast or crew. So a lot of the kind of conclusions that I've come up with are my own. So these might be totally wrong. If you know that like the directors outright said that this is not the case, then let me know. But so you're talking about how, the filmmaking, the mockumentary aspect of it is forgiving given the context of these guys who
right.
aren't
I said
really,
that on
like,
our Facebook chat. I was like,
yeah,
that was the first thought I had. I was like, you can kind of excuse any of the technical shortcomings by being like, well, this is a movie made by teenagers in the universe of the movie.
Like they're
but it's
trying to
also
make
a movie in reality that was made by a filmmaker who was still kind of learning how to make a movie as it went along.
It's very meta in a lot of ways like that, where it's like
I can relate to.
Yeah, absolutely. And anyone that's into filmmaking, and there's so many filmmaking references in this, but like the one thing that occurred to me, and this happens all the time, right? Because I think we've talked about this before. Found footage movies, like you gotta have that suspension of disbelief to some degree, because
you gotta follow the rules if you're the filmmaker.
But
if you're the audience member and they don't 100%.
Yeah,
well, this movie does a good job at it. A good job at following the rules of like, okay, these are the two camera guys that we have following us around all the time. They're always there, and this is the only footage that we have, other than the GoPros that they bring in at the end.
Yeah. So this is my take on that is, when I'm looking at found footage movies, and I don't know if you caught this, but in that scene where Owen steals the cake from the home ec class,
right,
and brings it, there's a kid in the back who's he's just holding a copy of the Blair Witch Project on VHS just up against his forehead for some reason.
Oh,
he's
wow.
just back there
I didn't
holding
even notice that.
I know, I didn't catch that when I watched it yesterday. It was like the third time for me watching this movie.
Same, actually.
Nice. It's a great movie.
Mainly because the ending is so traumatizing. If not for that, I would probably watch it more than that.
Yeah. But yeah, I noticed that yesterday. I was like, oh, that's funny, because that's your like original found footage, or not original, but like kind of like the one that set the chain reaction for found footage movies to come.
Yes.
But
because
like that
between Cannibal Holocaust and that, there wasn't really that much.
No, and like
maybe
you could say Cannibal Holocaust is still like a bit more, like not found footage.
It's like a split.
Yeah, it's like a split. But Blair Witch is always kind of like my, gold standard when it comes to found footage movies, because I think that they do a really good job of explaining why they're filming everything, and even like like when they're not shooting the documentary stuff about the Blair Witch, and like they're, being annoyed
Arguing
that,
and
yeah,
running
they're
around the
annoyed that
woods.
somebody is
Yeah.
still filming them when they're in these like, moments that
That's
are
like what
not.
half of the movie is about.
Yeah, and it's just like there's a good explanation. She's like, it doesn't feel like reality when you're looking through the camera lens. It's a good way to take your mind off of
That's
the
a Matt
reality of the situation.
Johnson quote in the movie, The Dirties.
Which is probably another nod to Blair Witch.
Maybe.
But so it's like it makes sense. And so then when I watch movies like Chronicle or something, where I'm like, okay,
Chronicle
like
breaks the rules too much.
yeah, I'm like,
it
this
kind
guy's
of
like got
adheres to the
superpowers.
perspective, but
Yeah, and he's using
that's
like some
fine.
of his mind power to like, get
Which is
sick
great.
angles.
It's an easy way to be like, look, we wanted to shoot some of this movie with actual steady cams and not just handheld the whole time. He's using
Yeah.
telekinesis. Fine. But then you get to like the Akira ripoff ending, and like there are some clever things where it's like, oh, the people in the Space Needle on their cell phones, or someone in an apartment building having a birthday that they're filming, like, someone singing and blowing out the candles, and then they crash to the floor or whatever.
Yeah.
But then you get to like the big courtyard where all the cops show up, and there's the statue with the spear that, spoiler alert, kills the main character of the movie. Like 80% of the shots in that, you're like, who the fuck is filming this?
Yeah, it
And
doesn't
why
make
do they
a lot
have
of
such
sense.
a long zoom lens? It's like it just forgets that it's like a found footage movie, or
Yeah.
they just stopped giving a shit.
And I think we talked about this a little bit with Cloverfield when we discussed that too. Like, there's just some stuff where you're just gonna have to be like, whatever, it's a movie, like it's entertaining. The pros outweigh the cons. Don't think about it too much. But that is something I keep in the back of my mind whenever I watch a found footage movie, where I'm like, does it kind of make sense? And I like it when they do cover that.
I think Cloverfield makes sense. I don't think there's really anything in it other than like maybe maybe the difference between the format, like we're recording on an SD card, but it's also a DV video because it's cutting in and out like a DV video would. Like an SD card is just individual files. It's not
Yeah, it
one
wouldn't be like
long
recording
reel.
over top. Yeah.
Yeah, which
And it's
is
also,
like a
I
plot
think,
detail.
Yeah, and I think if you bring into question like the the real technical, like the audio pickup quality when nobody's mic'd in Cloverfield, and like battery life and shit like
But that's
that.
what's nice
so
about the Dirties is that
that's
they
what
pretty
I
much
was gonna say.
explain
Is
every aspect of it.
they do for the most part. But this is why I find that Scarborough Bluffs cliff scene so pivotal, because when I saw this movie for the first time, a thought did occur to me throughout it.
It's
and that's
way too goddamn windy up there for them to get such clean audio.
Not just that, but like
No?
there's a couple things. So one thing is, along the way, you're starting to learn that, Matt Johnson is
The
kind
character.
of crazy. He's crazy. He's like he's reading
the real Matt
definition of
Johnson is kind of crazy, but in a good way. But continue.
Yeah, yes. The character of Matt Johnson is
Which, by the way, he did the same thing in the next movie, Operation Avalanche, which takes place in the 60s.
Yeah.
And has no connection to the Dirties, but it's still
kind of the same
main characters
movie,
are played
but
by
dressed-
Matt Johnson and
Yeah,
Owen Williams, and their
Williams.
names are Matt Johnson and Owen Williams.
It's kind of the same movie, but just dressed up differently. But
Oh, for sure, especially when you consider like
yeah,
the arc of the story and the fact that both of them are basically about the process of making a film against all odds. Although,
yeah, they're both technically love letters to cinema, both of those movies, because it's just,
for sure.
you can tell like how big of a film aficionado Matt Johnson is. But anyway,
Well,
my point.
let me extrapolate on that. I think that
Yeah.
the way that they use it in the Dirties is sort of almost like a parody, and maybe it is, reflective of Matt Johnson's growing up and watching movies like Pulp Fiction and Irreversible and Fight Club and Usual Suspects, which gets name dropped a lot. But I think that's sort of like that's part of the movie, is that like the characterization of these guys is that they are those guys, kind of like me. Growing up, I had a Pulp Fiction poster, because you see Pulp Fiction when you're 15 or 16, you think it's the greatest fucking movie ever made. And maybe it's, in the top 25, but when you're 15, you're like, that's the greatest thing ever. I want to rip that off, but never acknowledge that I'm ripping it off.
It's so relatable for all, like, anyone that got into cinema, like, in that time period, like, the Malkovich fucking
Right,
thing,
the
like,
being John Malkovich, the self Malkovich scene. Yeah,
it's all stuff from like that era. But anyway, what my point is that throughout the film, you're kind of seeing the transformation, especially through Owen's eyes, of who Matt Johnson is, and like, oh, is he like just trying to make movies? Is he eccentric creative guy, or is he a fucking psychopath? And then he even like reads the definition of a psychopath. It's like, you know what? Who does that remind you of? That's kind of me, isn't it?
In the Columbine book that someone wrote.
Yeah. In the Columbine, exactly.
Afterwards.
And so when I first saw it, like many, many years ago, I was like, it was sometime around that point where I started to go, well, hang on, wait, like now that we know that he's like kind of insane, like, is there a film crew? Like, we don't see the people, we do at some times, but I think that's only at the beginning when they're shooting the actual Dirties movie.
In the classroom, and they're like, you see the camera guy go like this.
But then like after that,
move fast enough.
after that point in the movie, it becomes now about them doing this actual shooting.
And don't forget about the popcorn moment. They're just having like a movie night watching, and for some reason, I don't know why. I think to go along with what you're trying to say is that it does seem like it reaches a certain point in the movie, and I did write this down as a note where it's like, I don't think Matt's the only psychopath here. I think whoever these camera guys are also psychopaths, because they're just filming this nonstop for who knows how many weeks, and they never once thought to themselves, maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we should tell Matt to fuck off and leave his cameras.
That's the thing. Like, I don't think that they exist. Like, that's what it kind of.
They do. They have names.
But you don't see them like after a certain point. And I think that because at that Scarborough Bluffs cliff scene,
but he's still actively editing the movie up until the very end when he goes to do the school shooting. So who else is getting that footage? How else would he have a physical film? We are watching a finished edited project that you watch being edited in the thing.
I get that.
So in the universe of the movie, the cameramen have to exist.
Hear me out. So in that bluff scene, the conversation that Owen and Matt are having is about how he believes that everything's a movie. And this is where Owen's starting to say, it's not all a movie. Stop acting. You're doing it right now. And it was this thing where I was watching.
It's because the cameras are there.
But there's a camera angle that's an impossible angle. That's on Owen that would have to be on the other side of the cliff.
Right.
And I thought, this is, like, and that's the thing, is like I said, I haven't looked into any like analysis for this film, but I was like, this is an interesting take.
That might have just been a director's shortcoming, though, as opposed to an intentional choice to muddle the reality.
But don't you think it would be kind of cool, though, if like in the film, because this is the thing too, is that like, what camera crew is going to follow around when they're seeing all these red flags, and then they're going to be charged too? You're complicit in the act.
If they're following him, they're literally less than 10 feet behind him while he's actively shooting people.
Well, he's actively shooting people, and they continue to follow him,
and they keep following him.
They know they're going to be charged with this. This is breaking the law by aiding and abetting this thing.
So
there's a lot of things.
A question I had about the aftermath of this movie, which we don't see. The movie ends. He shoots two bullies, and he sees Owen down the hall, who he thought was a part of the whole thing, and then he basically chases Owen. And all these people are like scared, running away from him because he's a crazy man with a gun who just killed people. And Owen goes into this classroom, and Matt follows him, and like Owen's at the far end of it, like trying to open a locked door to run away from his former best friend, who's now a murderer. And Owen still thinks that it's all part of the movie, and he's like, "What are you doing? It's me. Like, what? This is what we were working towards the whole time." Even though Owen basically like gets fed up, because there's a whole subplot in the movie where there's a hot girl at school that like obviously these nerds don't have a chance with. That's like, the stereotypical premise. But then like gradually it does kind of seem like Owen is getting somewhere with this popular girl, despite the fact that they're friends with these bullies that Matt hates to the point where he wants to murder them. And then they do the whole cake thing, and he's like learning a song on guitar. And did you notice, I don't know how much you know about the Matt Johnson sphere, but did you recognize the guitar teacher at all?
Is he in Operation Avalanche?
No, he's the other guy in Nirvana the band, the show.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't pick up on that now.
They said they wanted him to play the Owen role first, but he looked too old to play a high school.
That would have been weird.
Yeah. He worked a lot better as a teacher, despite the fact that they're the same age, but...
Yeah, now the casting was
I think he is
good.
actually older than them.
He looks older.
Yeah.
Anywho, but yeah.
I forgot where I was going with this.
Well, I think I might know where you were going with that, but
Okay, so culpability. Yeah. Owen was there the whole time. He's on camera. He's there with Matt discussing the plans, and this is evidence that obviously has been maintained to the point where they have that warning at the beginning. I mean, there is graphic violence in it, but it's staged. None of it's real, but they word the disclaimer in such a way that it is real, kind of like the Blair Witch Project. But like, I think we're not so naive enough as a culture to where we understand that like you can still like Fargo. You know, it starts out with this is a true story. It's like, well, obviously it isn't, but you can just say that, and there's no law that says you can't say that in a movie,
Sure.
even if it's complete bullshit. So, Owen was there, you know, he was there right up basically until the end and then just didn't go through with it. But I still think he could be considered an accessory because there's that scene where they have the bonfire. I think it's before they have the argument on the cliff, which is where things kind of turn for their friendship. But like Owen is still like, you know, sort of distraught over being bullied. And I think the turning point is when he does get the rock thrown at his head. And Matt is like, you know, obsessively writing down names of these bullies and like asking Owen. And Owen is just like sort of in his own world, but he's just giving him the names because, you know, I don't know, whatever his motivation is. But he doesn't realize that Matt is essentially making a plan. And like it gets down to the point where he has like pictures of them, like black and white photos. Like it almost has like a crazy man's, you know, what do you call it? Like a cork board with like, you know,
like
all the yarn and the pins and all that. And it's essentially just his plan to shoot up the school. And Owen sees this and he's like, you know, you've gone too far. Like this is psychopathic. And then, Matt does try to mock him about it. But like, I don't know, up to a certain point. Owen was obviously only in on it when it was part of the movie. But I think in the reality of the movie, you know, Matt gets arrested, he's thrown in jail. And then it's like, how much of it does he try to like rat out other people? Like, does he have the spine to take the responsibility, or is he going to be like, no, Owen was involved too, and these camera guys and Chrissy, even the girl? You know, at one point, Matt straight up says to her, you know, we're going to shoot up the school, and she goes, he's like, is there anyone you want us to kill? She goes, oh, probably this teacher who was the guitar teacher, by the way. It was the same character. I recognized the name when he showed up.
Nice.
But she's on camera saying that and saying good luck with the shooting. So it's like, I don't know how much to the I do think in reality when a school shooting happens, the shooter themselves pretty much takes all of the blame, and like maybe the parents get some of it with like the access to firearms. This is just what I've observed in the last decade plus in America. But I mean, I
don't think that there's been any school shootings where someone's actively documented it, to my knowledge. So I think there definitely would be some legal ramifications with doing that. But I think, you know, what's really good about this movie is that, like, yeah, there's this whole way that you could look at it, like, you know, the approach that you've taken, where it's like you can imagine the aftermath without seeing it and come to these conclusions, where it's like, for me, I thought, you know, I feel like there's layers to it and that there's some sort of degree of allegory, because the whole thing is like, it's this very interesting and almost comical take on approaching a mass murder situation as making a film.
Actually, like, I have to correct you. A mass murder is more than two people.
Okay, so
we only see him kill two people. He might kill more after the movie cuts, but
I guess you're right. Okay, so all right, a double murder.
Welcome
I guess
back to the Splitting Hairs podcast.
Yes. If you're going to commit he's committing a double homicide the same way that a film student would treat making a film. And it's in the wording itself, shooting a film, right? At your school, it's a school shooting. It's like the same thing. So it's an almost comical approach to, like, if you were a filmmaker, because he's saying, oh yeah, I'm going to come up with this great line at the end. Slacks are out, Jackson, or whatever. Right?
It was sweatpants.
Okay.
Sweats are out. Which apparently is something that he was told as a grade 5er going into grade 6, that sweatpants were out, and it changed his whole outlook on but that's what he was told. And then he's like, I'll be honest, after the movie came out, I kind of went hardcore back into sweats. Like, sweats have improved my life ever since
they're comfortable.
Decided I don't care what some kid in grade 6 thinks is cool or not.
They're comfortable. Can't deny it. But so anyway, point is that, you know, like, you can look at this film in different interpretations, I think. And like, what I thought was fun was looking at it from the interpretation that, like, it's just the ideal movie in Matt Johnson's head. After we've completed the Dirties video that they show the class and he walks out of because he's just so embarrassed by
the Dirties 2, it becomes a part of it, which is essentially the actual school shooting movie.
Yeah,
is the Dirties 2 within the universe of this movie.
Yeah, that to me, I believe it becomes now like you're inside of what Matt Johnson believes this movie could be, where it's like, in the reality of any world, nobody would be actively filming it when it got to that point. it would be hard to release it and stuff. And it's just kind of like, it's his. I feel like it almost like adds to it that it's the
Well,
idolized
I think you're
film.
also discounting the stupidity of high school students. I absolutely believe that a high schooler would film everything.
What I was going to
if
say,
they
though,
think
is
what
that,
they're
like,
doing is the most genius thing ever.
with the end credits being like that flash of all the like title cards of movies that would have influenced him or whatever, but saying the Dirties instead, or like they go through all the credits like that. It's almost like this kind of like life flashing before your eyes when you die sort of situation. And it was just kind of like, to me, it felt less like a, hey, yeah, Matt Johnson like killed 2 people or maybe more. And like, now we're the editing crew and we're responsible with like doing this end title sequence that he wanted. Why exactly, are we doing this?
Well,
The guy's a murderer.
Were you? Did
To
you?
me, it
you
feels
see the
more.
scene where he tells them that
There is
he's
that.
the one that made him, and he's like, "I'll render them. All
But
you have to do is just cut in the footage."
I'm looking at it from the perspective of that scene is not necessarily like super literal, like, because that is still after the original Dirties movies debuted at their class.
I think the whole movie is super literal, Jordan. Other than maybe the impossible angle that I didn't spot.
I think that there's so many like leaps of faith that you need to take with the idea that even though like there's stupid high school students for sure, I think that like the second that the gun went off, it would be hard to believe that anyone would continue to film and not run away and be like, oh fuck, he wasn't joking. So I think
that's why I said that they're probably also psychopaths, whoever these characters are, because I believe that they're real characters in the world of this movie.
And that's an interesting
the whole way through.
That's an interesting thing, because that's the suspension of disbelief, because it's never mentioned. We don't know anything about these people except for that they have some credits at the start, and you do see like people with the boom pole and stuff like that. But that all that stuff is isolated to the bits where they're legitimately making a movie for their class. But then after that, it becomes this other thing. So I think it could go either way, but I think it's fascinating to me to think of it in the sense that it's like after they shot the movie, and then after Owen got hit with the rock.
Things if you heard the camera people say something from behind the camera at any given point?
It could be, but I think that it's like, when you got
like, how much does a movie need to remind you that there is a camera crew filming for it to...
I think when it's a found footage movie, it's a constant thing, because it's like when you watch like a TV show like Modern Family or something, and you're like, who's filming this? It doesn't make sense. Like,
yeah,
I do take
umbrage with that style, like how Parks and Rec was like, it's just like The Office, where it really is a documentary, and then after 2 seasons, they just forgot about that. They flash forward 3 years, and it's not a documentary.
Yeah. Like The Office set everything up to make sure that you kind of understand why this is happening, but like
The Office followed its own rules that it started out with.
Yeah, it became a stylistic choice for TV shows, and so a lot of TV shows were just like, we'll just do that, but it doesn't matter. Like, everyone's going to talk directly into the... Yeah, we never established that there was a documentary being made on all these random people in Modern Family, and then like,
but it's also, I think The Office also has its own suspension of disbelief, because it's like these are still employees, and they are still like doing talking heads ostensibly during the workday. So they're taking time out of that to go into the conference room. The camera crew has the lighting set up and all that. It's like those scenes do seem to sort of happen in like a time vacuum, except for the parts where like whatever happens in the interview directly affects the plot. Like Pam is giving an interview and Jim comes in and goes, do you want to go on a date at the end of season 3? That is different than just like, it does sort of seem to exist in this like where in your 8-hour workday where, and maybe if I listen to all 100 plus episodes of the Office Ladies podcast, I would have the answer to this question. But I get what you're saying. I think
it still feels a little more grounded, where it's like, I think that, and like I said, there's so many found footage movies where you have to some degree, just go with it, because you're like, that's going to drive you nuts. And I'm sure that there's like things when you're making a found footage movie where you're like, oh yeah, this thing will happen. But does that, what about all the other things?
Here's the thing. I think the insinuation that the viewer has to start out a found footage movie knowing that they had to suspend the disbelief of why the cameras are being filmed, it implies that people aren't just used to that as a communication form of storytelling. I feel because of movies like Paranormal Activity and Cloverfield and the popular culture, I feel like that language of the fake documentary and The Office and Modern Family and Arrested Development and all that has become to the point where like you don't think about that.
Yeah,
and it's not the individual project's job to make you not think about it. You're already not thinking about it because of the genre. You're like, okay, well, I'm not really like the filmmaker in me can sit there and nitpick what could be real and what isn't. I mean, you know, but at the same time, like, I don't necessarily need everything to be spelled out for me, even in a genre where things are generally more spelled out, at least in terms of that like meta aspect. I think the Dirties does it in a way where you are just immediately along for their, you don't really need to focus, because I think they just establish how rough and tough thing like the guerrilla filmmaking is at the start. You know, he's got his lav mic on, he's brushing up against it, they leave it in the movie. You know, just those kids in the park, it almost seems like an accident, but I think they said they maybe met those kids like 5 minutes before they started doing the scene, even though it's all just like the whole movie's just an outline, and then they improvise all the dialogue. So whatever happens, unless it's like, you know, they need this beat to happen at this time. So
yeah, I think it's like definitely agree with all that. I think it's like, you know, for me, I think that it almost could be an intentional move to like kind of like 3/4 of the way through the film, kind of move the viewer further away from those like, you know
what
those
movie
kind of
does
more,
that? We might have
movie?
talked about it before on the podcast. Record 3, the Spanish series.
Yeah, I've only
Record.
seen the first one. They probably mentioned
You should
that
watch the
before.
second one because it's like a direct sequel. Like,
I think
takes
I
place on the
actually
same night.
own the second one, but I
They're
don't know if I've
basically
ever
like
watched it.
a 2-part movie, part 1 and 2. But the third one is like, they started to lean into like an anthology thing where they go to this wedding and there's like a camera crew filming the wedding. And then when the zombie outbreak happens, the in-universe camera gets shattered, and then it just transitions to a narrative camera for the rest of the thing. And it's like, well, it's automatically less interesting now because this is just a generic zombie movie.
Another movie
in Spanish.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I think that like, but with the Dirties, like it to me felt like they've established enough of that, like, you know, okay, we're gonna like inform the viewer of why this is happening at the beginning, but then they kind of like maybe made a stylistic choice to make that a little bit more vague towards the end, so that it left it up for interpretation. Where
I think that's Matt Johnson's whole style is the ambiguity of like, where does reality end and fiction begin? Like they named like Borat as like a similar, and I was gonna say Borat, and also which I guess the one I'm gonna name is 15 years later, so probably took inspiration from it too. The Eric Andre movie Bad Trip has that movie is almost entirely scene after scene of them filming in a place where people don't know they're filming, but yet still going through the story beats as if it's really happening to them, and then getting genuine reactions. The Dirties is basically that, except like they do it in a way to where they don't want to stand out in the environment they're in, which, you know, is illustrated by the fact that they basically just didn't have permission, because this is pre-Sandy Hook Canada. So you could just walk into a high school if you look high schoolish enough and just be around all these students and be like, all right, we got our wireless mics, we got our tiny little cameras, our total group of 4, including the 2 actors and 2 camera people. We're going to get our scene and we're going to get out of here, kind of thing.
Totally.
And then, of course, the ending was shot not incognito. They did actually rent out a school and had permission and explained to everyone what was going to happen, because, I mean, you have
that
to.
would be a little dangerous.
You can't stage a fake school shooting and not tell the people that are there that it's going to be fake.
Yeah.
So, but they said, I was listening to a thing, I don't want to derail too much from your point, but I was listening to one of his things, and he was saying that, yeah, we were told we would have the whole school free for that weekend. And then there was just a series of Mandarin classes happening while we were trying to shoot this school shooting. So, like, they weren't all empty classrooms or whatever, like, full of high school students. It was like they were still shooting at an active school, just not your traditional public school.
Right.
So
that's funny.
We can talk more about the like. I want you to get through what you're trying to say with your thesis, but I do want to talk more about the like the indie production that made this
for
movie.
sure.
Like,
there's so much to
not
talk about.
a Fox Searchlight production, like just a group of dudes who scrounged together some money. I think they got a little bit of funding from some.
It's very
Canadian
inspirational.
companies.
It's very inspirational. This one I actually did write down like a lot of notes for, because there is a lot to talk about. So yeah, my whole point being is that, you know, I feel like the movie is up for interpretation. I think it's really good in the way that it kind of makes that. It's so self-aware and so meta, because even that scene you brought up at the beginning when he's talking to that little kid and he's like, yeah, we're shooting a movie here. And the kid's like, oh yeah, we're shooting a movie too. He's like, what's the movie about? And he's like saying all this stuff, and then
About,
his
like, the
response,
zombies and vampires.
yeah,
and
his
all that.
Matt Johnson's response is like, wow, that's insane. But Matt Johnson's idea for a good movie is to actually go and kill people at his school, which is a way more fucking insane thought.
Right.
So
But I think the way he pitches it to those kids is it's like, oh no, well we're making a movie where we kill the bullies, but not a documentary. But like, because at that point it wasn't a documentary.
Well, no, that's what I mean. It comes full circle because it's his idea for the movie at the end of the film mirrors the kid's idea that he considers insane at the beginning because it's just taking things way too far. Because the Dirties wasn't what it became at the end. So I think that was pretty cool. But
I have to go back and rewatch that because I didn't pick up on that.
It's funny though because with him having Riz or whatever, like it's kind of funny because the huge divide that comes between Owen.
I thought we were
Matt,
trying not to remind people how old you are, Jordan. You can't just drop Riz like that and not expect me to point it out. I'm sorry.
Skibbity Riz. The divide that really happens between Matt and Owen is it comes in the way where like Owen finally recognizes not to take Matt's advice because Matt's advice pushes him further away from actually getting that girl. And it's like once he,
especially when he's already making progress.
Yeah, exactly. It's all
Matt
these like
just
little
keeps
things.
like shitting on her, calling her stupid and dumb and all that.
And I love that scene where they're like at that bonfire with the cousin or whatever, and like that girl, just like running the idea by the girl. There's like, we steal this cake from the home ec. She's like, that's fucking terrible. Like, and then he's like, I had this idea about playing.
There's 3 different fires in this movie. There's the first one with Owen and Matt, where he's taking down the list of the Dirties. There's the second one where they go to like this lake party, I'm assuming, because it's super dark. You can't actually see where they are. But I'm assuming it's nearby where they were shooting all those guns. And there's like a bunch of people there, and there's like older people. And they're like, oh, we're making this movie. And, part of it is there's this girl, and we're going to make her a cake. It's going to be super romantic. And they're like, well, that's super cheesy. It's not going to work. It does, despite everything. It's one of Matt's maybe not crazier ideas, but...
I just love how...
I guess, are easy to impress.
It's a really good cutting, because it's like, he says that, and the girl's like, that's not a good idea. And then he's like, well, what if my idea was I just play guitar in the hallway and then play something. She's like, that's a lot better, And then it's like, yeah, that's a lot better than the stupid cake idea, right? Then hard cut to them like fucking doing making the cake. I was like, that's great. But it's just, his confidence, Owen's confidence is affected by these fucking bad ideas that Matt's coming up with. And it's interesting because Matt's the director, and it's another layer of all this film stuff is he's trying to direct Owen to do the things that he thinks makes sense. But there's this conflict because Owen is his own person, and he knows that, like, well, I'm friends with this guy and I trust him and we like the same movies, but what he's telling me to do isn't something I would have done myself. And it leads him into the wrong areas. And it's perfectly exemplified in the shooting thing, because that's not the whole time he's like, yeah, that's a funny idea. Haha. Yes. It's a movie. It's funny. But like, he would never have taken the direction that Matt Johnson wanted him to go down to actually be a school shooter himself. So it's like, it's just this perfect, like,
Well, if he had less agency, maybe he would have, but because he is more of his own person. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly. So I think that stuff like that, and it is ultimately Matt's story, and that's what brings into question, where I think at least it brings into question, like, whether there is in that latter half a film crew or not, or this is just like inside Matt's head, and he's like, this is the movie that I want to make, and he's basically become so tied up in wanting everything to replicate the movies that he's ingested that he's viewing life only as a movie, and that's why that cliff scene's so pivotal. Because Owen's like, this isn't a film. Like, you're doing it right now, and we're not.
You're
making
always
a movie.
performing, basically.
You're always performing, and then that's why it kind of hit me, where I was like, but is there not a camera crew filming them right now, or is this the moment where he's literally like, wake up, fucker, nobody's filming you, like, stop acting. There's no movie.
I don't think it's that degree of like psychological. I think it is just more like they were probably there to shoot something, and they probably hadn't called to action yet, but the camera crew was filming anyway because they want to get, it is kind of a documentary that they're making in the universe of the movie. So it probably was just like, and I think he even has like a quick line when Owen's trying to yell at him. He's like, oh no, we're about to roll, or something like that. So that, like, they are there to make the movie, but Owen is no less correct in that
But it
context.
could go either way, I think, is
right.
I think that they did it intentionally that way to make it open to interpretation, which I appreciate any film doing.
I think Matt Johnson would disagree.
I would
personally.
love to have him on the show.
That would be
I've run
great,
run into him many times, and
because he's a Toronto.
he's a Toronto guy. He's
Yeah.
he's
He's one of the most Canadians that exist. Like, it's
and he's
weird
so
that
into film, you know. Like,
it's weird that you see someone have such pride for being Canadian. I mean, just as an American.
sadly, yeah, it is weird, but no, he's so into film though that's the thing. It's like if you go to any film premiere here in Toronto, you'll probably see him because he's just like
well, if you
he's
run
all
into
about
him
it.
at the next Neil Breen screening, I guess. Give him
I'll
give
tell
him
him
a
to come on the
card.
show. I'm
Yeah.
going to ask him. Say, was that all the figment of Matt's imagination? That end part, that the movie
No,
that he
I don't think
envisioned
it's
in his
entirely
head.
unreasonable that I could have reached out to him for this, except for the fact that he's currently in the middle of making Nirvana the band the movie.
Right, I
So-
heard about that. Yeah,
I think I told you about that.
probably. Let me see.
But
what
I think
got.
they were also filming in like downtown Toronto and actually had like cordoned off areas or something like that. I don't remember. I just remember reading something about where people were just around and saw them filming.
Were you aware of this movie when it came out?
Yes, let's talk about that because Kevin Smith comes
Yeah.
into the fold in a few ways here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't think there's a Clerks reference in the movie, but it does have a very, like the movie itself, The Dirties 2013, the movie that we're talking about, not anything inside the universe of it, has a similar sort of backstory to how Clerks was made, which was just a young filmmaker wanted to make a movie and just put all their like time and money into it and lucked out that it got a positive reception at a film festival that ended up getting it picked up. Now, the difference being that Kevin Smith made Clerks and it was picked up by the Weinstein Company or Miramax at the time. And Matt Johnson made The Dirties with his crew and it got picked up for distribution in America by Kevin Smith. And he had his Kevin Smith Film Club thing, which I don't know how long that lasted. I do remember watching the very first thing. I think it was even before he changed the name. I think it had a different name before Kevin Smith Film Club, where it was like Smod
Smodcast.
something. He tried to put Smod in front of everything. Smoothies, something silly like that. But there was a movie called Bindle Stiffs. Have you ever heard of the movie Bindle Stiffs, Jordan?
You know what? That sounds very familiar.
I think I brought it up to you a couple times.
Yeah.
But it's a similar kind of thing. Just a group of filmmakers with, digital cameras, basically no money, spending years and hundreds of hours putting this thing together, against all odds. Now, Bindle Stiffs is, for 16-year-olds, a great movie because it perfectly lines up with their sense of humor. And it's like, this is the movie you would make if you were 16. And nobody dies at the end. Well, nobody dies by firearm. Well... Nobody
Have you seen this
dies by
movie?
firearm inside a school at the end of Bindle Stiffs. I have. I actually did interview the guys that made Bindle Stiffs way
nice.
back in like 2012 before I had a podcast or video recording capabilities on a teleconferencing app that actually worked.
So you just interviewed them without any means of recording it? Is that not just a conversation at that point?
I think I might have recorded just the audio and then like transcribed it or something like that. But anyway, they made a movie. Kevin Smith picked it up. It was like less than $10,000 or maybe a little bit more. And then they got distribution. And then the same thing with The Dirties. They spent $10,000 of their own money of it, making it. And then they had put music that they didn't have the license to in the edit. And then when it got picked up for distribution, they spent 4.5 times the budget just on the music. And I think they said the most expensive track was from the Malkovich, the Being John Malkovich score.
Yeah.
But
That's
I could be
hilarious.
wrong on that one. But I would guess that the most expensive song in this is probably the cover of Pursuit of Happiness, which is a Kid Cudi song, but it's a cover that someone else made. That being said, the melody and the lyrics are still subject to a licensing fee. I think it's like publishing, or no, it's like songwriting, I think, is the license that you have to pay. There's like 3 licenses. It's like songwriting, publishing, and like perpetuity or maybe something else. But
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking that too when I was watching it. I was like,
that does make a lot of sense when I think a similar thing happened to Clerks, right? Where they spent like 28 grand because they shot that on film. And then when it got picked up, they had to spend like an extra 200 grand just to pay for all the grunge and whatever that he put in the movie.
Yeah, The Dirties, like, it's funny too because it's so specific. Like it's there's so much focus on the soundtrack in the movie because it's so fucking meta, right? Like it's like we're gonna do this montage with that Best Coast song, and then it's like there's the montage with the Best Coast song playing in the background. It's like,
That's also
you
a fun aspect of the movie is watching him direct it both in character and in reality.
Do you think he really fell off of the bike?
Yes.
I feel like that was like a blooper that just kind of made its way into the film.
It was either a blooper or he had in his mind, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to make it look like it wasn't supposed to happen.
Yeah, because I feel like Owen's reaction is so genuine to that, and it like looks like a concern, like, oh fuck, like the director just like fucking slammed.
And then he just gets back up. He's like, I'm fine.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I feel like that was... Because I mean, it'd be easy to see.
A microcosm for his arc, right?
Yeah,
He keeps getting knocked down, and no matter what, he has his mission, and he's just going to get back up and finish it to whatever disturbing ends.
It's true. Yeah, it's like a really, really smart film, like a no stone left unturned sort of situation. But did you see when it was first released? I guess it had like Kevin Smith did this.
To end my release when it first came out story, I think I only ever saw it for the first time on Netflix.
Okay.
And then this one, it was actually on Prime, but you had trouble finding it in Canada of all places, and that actually does make sense because I'm listening to those like Q&As from 11 years ago, and they're like, yeah, no one in Canada really gave a shit, but people in America embraced the movie, and we got a bunch of offers in America.
Well,
so it might just be that Canada never got the interest necessary for distribution to make it readily available a decade later.
It could be the subject matter is school shootings is obviously a much more American thing than a Canadian thing. But
it was still so fresh when it was like making the festival rounds like in 2012 or 2013.
For sure, yeah. I know like when it came out, someone that I was working with had recommended it to me. And I ended up like torrenting it, but I looked it up because at the time they had their own like Dirties website. And you could buy like the DVD, and there was like fucking 20 different like slipcover variants, and they were all done in the style of like different movies. So similar to how they do the end credits with like the Dirties font and all that. But they did the whole.
Well, he was also talking about how he was a big proponent of the physical media and the bonus features and commentaries and all that.
Yeah, I wish I would have got one.
As a film student in the 90s with DVDs, that was like the greatest possible tool you could have.
Yeah. I wish I would have got one of those DVDs at the time, but I didn't. But yeah, they had like, it was all the, like they had one that looked like the Goonies. They had one that looked like fucking Time Bandits. They had like Back to the Future and all those other, Fight Club and shit like that they have in those credits. And I was like, this is cool because it's like, it is such a cinephile's like film, and I think that's why it resonates a lot with people like us, because it's like, we've been through that. If you go to film school or you've tried to make a film ever, like, even like that scene where they're playing the Dirties for the class is just so perfect because it's just like
it's too relatable.
It's too relatable. I mean, I remember I made a movie with my friends when I was in high school, and we showed our biology teacher, and I remember like us being like, "This is so good! Like we fucking made this so good," and we're just like watching it, and he's just like, "Okay, wow! Like what the fuck is wrong with you kids? Like why did you make this? This is terrible." Like the subject matter's awful. Everything's trying to be way more like, graphic and grotesque than it should be. There's like no proper...
we're kids. We don't know.
Yeah, there's no proper pacing.
These
or
guys
like
have New Jersey accents in
Spain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nuevo Jersey.
Nuevo Jersey.
So yeah, no, I think it's
okay. Let me ask you. Speaking of Canada, payphones in high schools. What the fuck is that? Is that a thing?
No, I mean not for a long time. I mean, I'm sure, like payphones. I
guess you didn't go to high school in Canada, so you can't.
I didn't, but I went to. So I went to college. I went to the number of different colleges and universities here in Canada, but I went to one that actually was the TV set of Degrassi, and yeah.
Well, there you go.
And so I think there were some payphones, but I think it's just like anything, like any shopping malls and stuff like that. There's these relics of the past.
I've never known that before. Now that you went to a school that they filmed Degrassi at.
Yeah. Drake was rolling around the hallways in the wheelchair.
Wheel. What do we have here?
But yeah, I think that I think they have to have like some in some areas. Like I see payphones sometimes at the shopping malls, or like there's like one payphone that's just fucking beat
just like
up
an emergency.
Just some emergency thing that's been there for 50 years in a subway station or something. I don't know, but
look, I'm sure Superman is grateful if he ever has to come to Toronto.
I would imagine in a high school
Phone
scenario,
booths.
if someone like drenched your clothes and you're stuck in your gym clothes, you'd probably just go to the principal's office and be like, "Can you call my mom? This
Or
is
the
what
nurse
happened."
even.
Yeah, you wouldn't be like, I don't think anyone would go to a payphone, but nevertheless, it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I saw that and I was like, what the fuck? Like, we just have
What year is
landlines
this?
at the schools, you know?
Yeah.
We've mentioned Owen Williams as like the straight man character. Can we talk about him for a little bit? Because he's great in this movie.
He's so good. Yeah.
And he's so natural. And I mean, and there's a good reason. It's because he's not an actor.
yeah.
Like, not in the way that Matt wasn't an actor, at least like not having any credits established other than his web show.
Yeah.
But like Owen is literally just like a dude who was just
He's
like a friend with him. He was a teacher. I think he still is a teacher.
Yeah. He's a perfect non-actor because like you get that relatability from him because when I mean both of them
going back, we can keep going back to the cliffside scene that where he loses it on Matt for the first time. Because there is no scripted dialogue, that's Owen. That's him venting with the real Matt Johnson in character. Like, he knows he's performing, but he's like, this is I'm gonna just go off and like, because the character of Matt Johnson and the real Matt Johnson are so similar, minus the psychotic killing. I completely buy that he was able to, because they said it took like so long to make the movie in reality of the Dirties, that I can see those frustrations building up in a similar way, but again, minus the psychopathic angle in this part is being an indie filmmaker, which I guess you have to be a little bit crazy to be that dedicated to something that not a lot of people will believe in. But I guess Owen was down because not only was he in this, he was in the sequel, the spiritual sequel, Operation Avalanche. Again, playing himself, but not
it's
close enough. But he wasn't alive in the 60s.
Yeah, phenomenal job at just being a relatable, even like like you said, they're in their mid to late 20s when they're doing this movie, but like you can still believe them as high school students because of the way that they act. And it's like, you definitely get the sense that Matt is more of a seasoned actor. He's more animated with the way he's telling everything to Owen. But Owen is like that guy you knew at high school who's just like kind of a loser, but there's not really anything like overly like lame about him to like, draw the bullies. Like, it's like the bullies were drawn to him because of fucking Matt.
I'm gonna come at it from the bully's devil's advocate. His face and haircut and pasty skin, and maybe how skinny he is. Those are
sure.
You can just immediately,
but
if you want to find something to bully someone about, you can.
But if that kid,
just
if
because
that kid
you don't
picked
have the
up
mentality of a bully doesn't mean it's not there.
If that kid picked up a skateboard, he'd be fine. Like,
true.
So it's like he wasn't like fucking magnified glasses, like braces, like nerd stereotypical. That's like the easy target for everybody. It was kind of more that his bullying came as a side effect of being friends with Matt, because he's more of like a nerd.
Yeah, can we talk about the really ugly nerdy character who also
who
bullies
keeps saying
them?
weird fucking shit. Yeah.
I'm like, where did they find this kid? Like,
I know. I was
he's
like,
so
is that guy
authentic.
real? Yeah, his teeth.
Like, I think they probably knew him and just had him do that in the movie. But like the way that he looks like that the underbite fish from Finding Nemo, the one with the glowfish.
Yeah.
I mean, he looks like that, but like a person. And it's like I'm sure I know kids exactly like that who would not have a single ball to even pick on someone slightly above them in the social ladder, but he does, and it seems to work almost. Like they almost get out bullied by someone who you would assume would
more bullyable. Yeah,
right.
I actually when I was in high school, I knew people like that. Like they're the people that try to circumvent being bullying by becoming bullies themselves.
But that's how
it's
how
a funny
the
thing to
bullies that
witness.
bullied them became bullies.
Yeah,
because they were getting bullied.
Of course, it's an amazing
vicious cycle.
But it's also like this, it's this funny thing to witness, because it's like you're way more it's just trying to hide in plain sight or something. Like if
right.
If I become the bully, then that'll shift focus from me onto them. But it's like
Speaking of documentaries and bullying, have you ever seen the documentary Bully from 2011, Jordan?
Kind of rings a bell. But I think I'm thinking of that movie with the guy from One Direction, and that wasn't a documentary. So no.
Well, I don't even know what you're talking about there, but no, it was like this camera crew just followed like kids in middle school and I think high school just getting bullied. And it kind of felt like obviously it was an important thing and they made it this whole thing about getting a PG-13 rating so that they could show it to kids in schools and all that. But it's also like, so you're just filming these kids getting like assaulted and not doing anything. You're just literally like filming them and showing it off to the world. And it's like, you just feel so bad for those kids. So like, I don't know. The Dirties kind of, I guess the first part of why I brought this up is like, it feels like the Dirties almost, well, I don't know. I could say that it's making commentary on that, but it's also like that movie came out while they were filming the Dirties, like gradually over 2 or 3 years. So I don't know if they saw that and decided to implement that or if it's just, a coincidence.
That's just pure cinema verite, my friend. It's a good question you bring up because, like, yeah, is it morally okay to just allow that to happen while you're filming it? But I ask you this question: is the fly on the wall complicit if it watches a bullying happen and does nothing?
I don't know. You walk the tightrope of ethics when it comes to documentary filmmaking, and especially when you get to a topic like that, like you're in that situation as a crew member, like. You can argue whether it was right or not later, but are you going to get the shot or not? Like, that's what we're here for.
You got to get the shot.
It's kind of fucked. I mean, I guess maybe that's what the Jared and the other, maybe real or not real camera people were thinking. But
possible.
So the other reason I brought it up is like, okay, so they showed bully to kids in schools, right? Mm-hmm. So do you think the Dirties is worthy of that same a level of like public service, or is it too like edgy and too much of a like a movie to serve as a sort of parable or like almost like a warning,
cautionary tale
to maybe the kids the cautionary tale to the kids that, I mean, because they were pulling from Columbine, and like the whole thing about Columbine was they were getting back at their bullies.
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
Well, my answer would be no. I don't think it should be shown in schools because I think the thing is with the Dirties is that while it's a phenomenal film, it should be shown in probably film class. I don't think it should be shown as like a PSA for like
oh yeah, because there's gonna be kids that don't get.
There's gonna be kids that don't get it. And there's also gonna be
that he's in the right.
There's gonna be kids that side with Matt Johnson, this character in this film, and that's a risk that I don't think any school is willing to take.
Yeah, especially not in America.
Not in America.
Look at these Canadians, these crazy Canadians.
What are we going to do, throw snowballs at each other? What are we going to go on a snowball spree,
You joke, but you ever get hit in the head with a glass bottle of maple syrup? That's going to leave a big old dent in your head. That could even cause some internal bleeding, eh?
But the cool thing about it is that once that glass shatters, that maple syrup is just sealing that wound for you. No blood.
It seeps into your brain.
It seeps into your brain. It's the quickest way to get maple syrup in your body. So, that's the Canadian way. Things seem brutal, but there's always the silver lining. That's basically hockey in a nutshell.
Okay, you lost me.
I think I lost myself, too.
For a minute there. I mean, I guess maybe if it was made by like a more professional studio, and it was like on a similar level, maybe, it wouldn't be like everyone gather in the auditorium and let's watch this special presentation kind of movie, but it could be like,
Well, here's the thing, is that the bullies are fucking assholes. They're never shown, like, there's never a redemption side to their story. You only see it from Matt Johnson's side. So it's like, if you were to play a movie like Elephant or even like Bowling for Columbine, let's assume it's an unbiased documentary, or Polytechnique.
Here's a secret, Jordan. No documentary is unbiased.
No.
Truly. Yeah, I know.
No, I know that.
Even the people you expect to be unbiased, like CNN, they've got a slant. Everyone's got
What?
Everyone's got an angle.
That's crazy.
I know.
Crazy.
I hate to break it to you, but welcome to the real world,
crazy.
Motherfucker.
Okay, my life has been altered forevermore.
I feel like this being an indie movie is probably the greatest tool it could have, at least in terms of like how these characters come off in the first 5 minutes, because they're quoting one of the most graphic lines from The Usual Suspects to like a 10-year-old, and then like saying the F slur multiple times, referring to the bullies while they're in character, but also not. I think one time he says it and he's not in character.
And then he says something like that. Does he say, "Don't, you shouldn't use that word" or something when they're not in character?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly the context. But then they show a clip from, I'm assuming, some movie they were trying to recreate that has
With
a black
the
character
blackface?
in it.
Yeah.
And Matt's in blackface. And I'm like, holy shit, in the first 5 minutes, you've got swearing at children, you've got homophobic slurs, and you've got blackface. I'm like, no fucking wonder the wholesome Canadian film industry didn't want to touch this with a 30-foot pole.
I put that down in my notes, the blackface part, because that also felt very intentional. You know, like it.
Oh, absolutely. It's the naivety of a high schooler.
It's an early
not
setup.
Getting that.
Yeah, it's an early setup that he doesn't know how to make the right choices necessarily, and then that all comes to crazy fruition at the end of the film, obviously. But it's like, yeah, he's got an idea in his head. It's not necessarily translating on camera. And you have to make these mistakes to learn from them as a filmmaker. And, you know, this whole thing is his wackadoodle idea for a movie.
I like that the teacher telling
people.
them to cut all of the profanity and the violence is just cutting out most of the movie. It's like in the South Park movie, the movie within the movie, Asses of Fire, the Terrence and Phillip movie.
Right,
they said that one of the jokes in the movie is that the G-rated version is 67 seconds long or something like that, as opposed to, 80 minutes. So this being a nice, I gotta say, for an 83-minute movie, this feels, just because of the tension that's built up in the plot and the execution, it feels way longer than that, because you know what's coming on a rewatch. Even if it's just your first time, the tension of, is that going to happen or not, is enough to keep you on edge for the whole time. And it's not until you see him walking in with that giant duffel bag into the side stairwell, you're like, all right, they're doing it. Here we go. And then there's, I like the scene in between that and him actually doing the shooting, where he's just sitting there thinking while like people are going by, and you're just like, what is going on in that head? Is he actually thinking about not doing it? Is he, because at this point Owen calls him the night before, but then he doesn't answer it, and so it's like, does he think about trying to reconcile with Owen and maybe this whole thing is dumb, and but it works really well for a cover picture when you're trying to promote an indie movie.
For sure.
A guy in a bright orange shirt in his ripped knee, completely knees ripped out jeans.
And the shirt says, we're just here for the bad guys.
We're just here for the bad guys. That's like his whole mantra, which is also like, that doesn't really matter. It's still murder.
You're the bad guy if you murder someone.
Which, okay, can we talk about the coincidental timing of this and the assassination of the United Healthcare CEO?
The fact that we're watching this,
now. I mean, the fact that we watch this while this is still being like, this is like the main thing on social media right now, is everyone either thirsting over this guy or discussing the ethical dilemma of or the moral dilemma of killing a bad person.
This is the Joker in real life, right?
It is kind of.
Society's reaching that.
It's Todd Phillips, the Joker in real life, basically, except minus the face paint. And this guy has a way more silly Italian name than Jack Nicholson's Joker.
I was blown away by his name when I first heard it. I was like, you gotta... It basically...
It's me, Luigi Mangiani. I'm going to kill the CEO. But no, he's just like some dude from I don't even know where he's from. I've honestly just stopped using Twitter after the election. I'm like, I'm done. I'm not doing this shit. It's been 16 years since I signed up as a 12-year-old. I don't think I need this anymore. I don't need anger and despair all day long, every single day, forever and ever. Like, I don't even want to use Blue Sky because it's just shitting on Twitter. It's like, I don't need any of it, okay? Elon Musk is basically the vice president. Like, it's already a waking nightmare. I don't need thousands of people reminding me and shouting about it to ruin my day. So
it's too much. It's too much.
I just think, despite all my rage, I'm still just a rat in a cage. And maybe that's how Matt felt.
And you say you don't listen to grunge.
Everyone knows that fucking song, Jordan. It's one of the biggest meme songs that exists.
What's it called?
Bullet in Butterfly with Butterfly Wings by the Smashing Pumpkins.
See, not everybody knows that, though. There's a lot of people that
I was about to say REM, but I always get them confused.
Well,
Which
I
I
mean,
probably shouldn't, because the lead guy from REM has a voice that doesn't make me want to pour cement in my ears like Rain Maida from Our Lady Peace.
Rain Maida, you want to pour cement in your ears.
Exactly. Quick shout out to Final Cut 7.
Oh,
Final
yeah.
Cut Pro 7,
R.I.P.,
which
R.I.P.
is heavily in this movie. Yeah, it was like basically right as this movie was being made that FCPX came out, and it went from that like bright screen to the and manually rendering to the dark screen and automatically rendering, which, you know, everyone's RAM and hard drive just love. They love rendering while editing. And the CPU, they all just love it.
Love it.
So,
you know,
I'm sure it's improved a lot in the last 12 years, but
I was so mad having to make that switch to FCPX
and realizing you couldn't go back, even if you stole your copy.
It's so annoying. Yeah, FCP7 was my jam throughout all film school, and like, you know, I held on for as long as I could before I had to make the switch, and then I made the switch, and I was like, this sucks. This is fucking what's it?
iMovie Pro.
iMovie, yeah, it's iMovie Pro.
Yeah.
And I was like, I hate this. Now I've grown accustomed to it.
Within the year of FCPX coming out, I switched to Premiere, and I have not gone back since. I have not gone back to Sony Vegas either. That piece of shit.
I still know people that use FCP7 though, and I don't know how.
And
I guess
to
it's
them,
like not
I
connected to the internet.
And respect.
You know who it is who uses it still.
Who's that?
Another Canadian filmmaker called Brett Kelly.
Huh. That name sounds kind of familiar.
Famous for I think he's made like 50 films, none of which exceed a 2 out of 10 rating on IMDb.
Okay, so probably
Jurassic
Bad
Shark.
Santa.
Lost.
He was an actor in Bad Santa.
No. That's a different Brett Kelly. The Brett Kelly, the director, is he did Ouija Shark. He did Jurassic Shark.
Well, that's all you had to say.
Raiders of the Lost Shark. Lots of shark movies.
So going back to Tubi, where we were talking in the previous episode.
And if you watch, I think it's on Tubi, or it might even be on Prime, you can watch Conga TNT, which is a movie by Brett Kelly that stars a little cameo by me. And of course, there's the kaiju glam metal Shark Attack movie that's coming out in February, also by Brett Kelly.
How many movies have you cameoed in? How many like Z level movies are you in? Even for like a few seconds.
Definitely three features, and then one short. I did. It's not a feature. I'm like a secondary character in the whole of one short film. It's pretty bad though. It's actually really funny.
Well, all right.
It's bad. They're all bad. They're all bad. But
should we change the podcast to a cameo actor and a filmmaker?
I think I have to do a couple more. I was going to shoot a cameo part for Ouija Shark 3, but I missed the deadline. So
I think I think a couple of my friends who were in that band that I did that short tour with, they have a cameo in Terrifier 3. Where they shot one and it got cut out. I can't remember which one, but I think they're in like, they collaborated with some other band that had Art the Clown, like the actual guy in makeup in the music video.
Oh, cool.
I think they did that all at the same time. But I think they shot a scene for Terrifier 3, which is funny considering that before my friend was a guitar player in a punk band, he was a child actor who was in like Barney, and he got cut out of True Grit and all this other stuff.
Oh, really?
So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's a much cooler claim to fame than being in, kaiju glam metal.
even just not being in a Coen Brothers movie, but having the experience of going on set and being directed by the Coen Brothers. I mean, that's priceless, you know?
That's awesome. That's very cool.
It beats living in a van, traveling the world. Ugh, whatever. Okay, so I'm just going to go real quick through the notes that I took that we didn't discuss, and you can do the same. Maybe we can trade off. But do you remember the scene? There's several scenes where he like opens the doors in his closet or whatever, and then he's like wearing a costume to show off to the camera. And one of them, he like pulls it aside, and there are balls. I don't know if they're real balls.
I felt like they were prop balls.
I think they had to have been.
Yeah. I think that would be a very bold thing to do on your first feature film, is to not only is it going to be about this subject matter, and
hey, Tom Green did it, okay? He was the actor, writer, director, and actually I don't know. Does he show his balls and Freddy got fingered?
You know, it's funny you bring up Freddy Got Fingered because I was going to bring that up earlier because you were talking
Speaking
about
of
that
Canadians,
that Terrence and Phillip like censored Asses of
right?
Fire.
You
They
can't show Freddy Got Fingered
on
on
the
TV.
DVD of Freddy Got Fingered. There's a G version that you can click on, and it's literally like 30 seconds long.
Is it just him going through the mall on the skateboard while
It's pretty
screaming?
much just the animated bits from towards the end where he's like a half zebra centaur.
I gotta watch that movie. I didn't know that was part of it. I mean, I know he makes cartoons in it, but okay. I wasn't sure if the lunch scene where Owen backs up his chair and then knocks some guy's food out of his hand was real or not. But then you see that guy come back at the end in the shooting, and I was like, okay, that was planned. It was just so authentically staged that I couldn't tell if that accidentally happened and a real student at that school decided to bully this guy. But I think that the acting level from like the supporting characters was just good enough.
Yeah.
Like for the people that knew they were acting. That doesn't include Matt Johnson's mom, who gives a great performance because she doesn't know she's being recorded and she's just being herself. And it's the scene where he's asking if he's crazy or not to her, and she's like, "Where did that even come from? Like, what are you talking about?" So it's like I don't think she knows she's in a movie right now. I think it's a real interaction that they filmed in the context of the movie.
For sure.
I gotta say, I love the put on your mic scene because it actually does call attention to the Cloverfield thing that you were bringing up, how everyone is perfectly audible. Like in the context of that scene, you can't really hear Owen except for maybe whatever Matt's mic is picking up 20 feet away until he gets out his little pack and turns it on and all that. And I think The Office does a couple gags like that too, but I always appreciate calling attention to that because audio is hard when you're shooting documentary style.
And especially when you're making this
clean audio
love letter to indie filmmaking, you know, like your crowd, your ideal demographic here is indie filmmakers. So yeah, we want that scene because that's going to make us go, "Oh yeah, that's right." Lav mics.
Okay, so there are several points in the movie, and this happens a lot in real life if you watch interviews with him, but Matt's character occasionally will end a statement with "a." And I'm like, yep, this is Canadian, all right. I'm like, he is more Canadian than most Canadians. At least, I don't know if he plays that up or if that's just a natural byproduct of growing up Canadian.
I think it's a natural byproduct
I appreciate
it. I don't think that it's ever explicitly mentioned that it's taking place in Canada. I think that they're probably
but I think you can eventually figure it out with like the teachers have accents and just the way people say the word "about." Pretty much gives it away.
Sure. But I think that's incidental. That's not like they probably were like, this is just somewhere in North America. But those little telltale signs.
I think it's supposed to be Canada, but I don't think they needed to make a big deal out of it to emphasize that. Possibly, like I can't remember what movie I was watching recently where it takes place in. Oh, it was Death Wish 3. Death Wish 3 takes place in New York City. Every frame of film was shot in London. Oh. So. You know, you can Chronicle, actually, to bring up a found footage movie. It's supposed to take place in the suburbs of America. It was shot entirely in South Africa. Wow. Because it was cheaper. And they got better tax breaks. But this movie didn't have a $12 million budget.
No, exactly. So, I mean, they shoot a lot of shit here in Toronto that, you know, is supposed to be America. But, like, I think...
Boys, although that's Vancouver.
It didn't... No, the Boys shoots right across the street from there. They're always fucking...
I think they do both. I think they do both Vancouver and Toronto.
Yeah, probably. But they're always fucking up traffic out there, man. Find some other place to shoot your fucking TV show, all right?
It's the last season, okay? Give them a break.
I don't watch TV.
I just need the writing to get better, honestly.
Yeah. But yeah, I didn't think about the fact that like I forgot that it was a Canadian movie until they got to the fucking Scarborough Bluffs, and I was like, oh fuck. The Bluffs. I got to bring this up because you can cut to the clip of me standing on the same cliff.
So speaking of locations in Canada, I found it funny that they went to this empty lot, which I think was probably some sort of like mining site to shoot bullets and all that. Mm-hmm. And it reminded me of when I watched the behind the scenes of The Thing, and they were like, yeah, we obviously couldn't shoot in Antarctica, so we found this lot in British Columbia where we just flattened it and made this big base. And I'm like, empty lots has just got to be like 75% of Canada. Or not even empty lots, but just empty wilderness to go and shoot your gun. Whether or not you're there for animals or not, it's just got to be most of Canada.
I mean, that specific kind of quarry thing that they were in was a little less common, because there's a lot of like forestry around and stuff like that. So to find like an open spot like that's a little less common, at least in Ontario. But there are like, when when I was watching it, yesterday, I was like, I wonder if that quarry is the one that's just up past Peterborough, because there's some like notable ones and stuff like that, but they're not like
I'll just
that super
drive
abundant.
out there and roll the dice.
Yeah.
And if it is, then it'll be worth it. And if you don't, then I don't know.
Wasted a bunch of money on gas.
Yeah. Okay, so going back to Bindlestiffs and Kevin Smith, I was curious about the crossover between the two, because if you've seen Bindlestiffs, you know that they're basically trying to do their own version of Catcher in the Rye, but with 3 guys instead of 1. And to the point where one guy's wearing the Red Hunter hat and he's got the copy of the book in his back pocket, like the guy that shot John Lennon. And so that's a whole thing. And then in this movie, they bring up Catcher in the Rye, and Matt has like 6 copies of it because he's, I guess, trying to imitate Mark David Chapman, or like, wasn't there another famous assassin that had Catcher in the Rye?
I think there might have been, but all that's coming to my head is Butters from South Park.
Which was probably making fun of Mark David Chapman.
Yeah.
So in Bindlestiffs, that's like a whole thing, and there's a character in that movie who's like the security guard at the school who becomes convinced that they're going to do what the Dirties does in the end, which is students bring guns to school and kill people, but it's just a delusional security guard who goes out and buys his own gun and then ends up shooting the homeless woman that one of the characters had sex with. It's a whole thing, but you got to watch this movie, George. I mean, it's not particularly
just spoiled it for me, but
I guess, but yeah. So I was wondering, why did both of these movies that Kevin Smith put his hands on to get distributed have that Catcher in the Rye through line? And I Googled it, and it turns out it's one of his favorite books.
Interesting.
And I was like, that seems random, but it's also like, these are high school movies, so I guess makes sense that these kids are being, I guess, made to read this book that they might not particularly care for. But it's just on, everyone's always thinking about Catcher in the Rye because, you got to do the homework. Of course, they do eventually reference Columbine in the thing, which probably better than referencing a fictional movie.
But they could have referenced Bowling for Columbine, because I feel like in that whole like wheelhouse of films that people watched with the Pulp Fictions and stuff like that, like Bowling for Columbine was a big one.
And 15, or what? How they're supposed to be like 17? That's like the perfect age to buy into all of Michael Moore's like,
of course, yeah,
logical stretches that he puts into his movies.
Did you ever see the movie?
Everyone should just get on a boat and go down to Mexico if you want cheap, life-saving drugs. I mean, what's the problem? Everyone can do that. Everyone can afford to do that.
Did you ever see the movie Elephant by Gus Van Sant?
No, but he does reference, Matt Johnson does reference it in talking about the movie. So I'm assuming, I have not even heard of it. I think the most obscure Van Sant movie I know is Jerry, and I haven't even seen that. So I mean, what is Elephant about?
Elephant,
is it about
it's
Jack White?
It's no, it's about some white kids though, and it's pretty much like it's basically Columbine. It's a school shooting movie. Is it like Harmony Korine's script Kids mixed with like Columbine, or am I off the mark completely? No, not really. It's very dry. I think the dryness lends to the kind of horror and the tension, because it literally just follows kids leading to this school shooting, but from different vantage points. So it's kind of like you follow one character and then it gets to this school shooting event, but then you follow another character and then it also leads to that. So it kind of like goes back in time, but you see how these sort of pathways connect, and like, what information certain people know about, and you're not really ever, you don't really follow the shooters. You follow like other kids and like what they're doing throughout their day before this event happens. I think it's a really good movie. But if we're rating school shooting movies, the best school shooter movie out there, the best one out there is Polytechnique by Denis Villeneuve.
Oh,
so good. That's
on my list. I didn't know that had a school shooting in it.
That's a real story. Polytechnique is a college in Quebec. This fucking guy, super hated women, just decided to go and kill all the women in the school, and it is such a harrowing film. Terribly tragic event, but just like done so much justice by an amazing filmmaker. And the cool thing is
in like conveying the seriousness of
The
the tragedy,
seriousness
but
of the
also,
tragedy,
like,
yeah.
not glorifying
Absolutely
the
not.
act.
No.
Okay.
You definitely feel very, very strongly towards the victims, and like it's cool. They shot it twice at the same time in English and in French. So there's an English, like they've got Quebecois
Okay.
actors
Is
that
that
are
the
all
one you?
doing
Is that the one you mentioned in our enemy
I probably did. Yeah.
discussion?
I think
Okay.
I probably did. Yeah, it's
Well,
so
now it's
good.
on my list. So
But yeah, so you don't have to feel bad about
I'm
watching.
gonna go on a school shooting movie spree after this.
You definitely include that word movie in there.
Yep.
So yeah.
It's a good thing we're not monetized. Okay, so I think the only other thing that I wanted to talk about is just a fun little tidbit, which is that the working title for the film, believe it or not, was Deacon Blues.
Oh no.
Yes, named after the Steely Dan song.
Okay. So you're
And
saying
they
named
said
after our
you know.
favorite guitarist / keyboardist / solo artist / member of Animal Collective.
No, deacon as in like the church deacon.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, obviously there's a great lyric in that song, which is they say they got a name for the winners in the world. I want a name when I lose. And I feel like the Dirties does kind of work in that aspect where Matt talks about how like ultimately he becomes the Dirties by the end, like whatever idealistic version of these evil bullies he has in his head. That's essentially what he becomes because he takes it to the ultimate degree of
the most evil is killing
lethal
somebody.
violence as opposed to non-lethal violence. Yeah. So
Fascinating.
but really the most problematic thing about him was the blackface. I mean,
hey, 2013 was still a slightly different world than what we live in currently. So.
Well, Donald Trump was still a punchline back then, so yeah, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? But yeah, I do like to imagine
call up Luigi
that,
Mangione.
There you go. I mean, yeah, actually, I'm not gonna follow that bit down the road.
No, I've already said too much.
Yeah, we've been talking for an hour and a half.
Amazing.
We've talked about this movie longer than the duration of the film, which I think has happened several times already with this podcast.
It's always it's the perfect indicator of a good film.
That's
that
true.
Spawns discussions that can go on like infinitely, and that's what I love about the Dirties, like because whether or not you agree with my interpretation of it or I agree with your interpretation, there's so much conversation that can be had about a movie. You see these fucking movies that come out in theaters and you like leave and you're just like, I don't even want to think about it anymore. There's stuff that'll come, like a fucking Blumhouse movie, let's say, like you'll watch that and you can't have a discussion. You can't watch Imaginary or like Tarot or whatever and then like come out and be like, so what'd you think about it? The only thing you can say when you come out of that movie is, what do you think about it? It wasn't as bad as some of the other shit. And that's the end of the discussion.
That's the Blumhouse slogan. It wasn't as bad as some of the other shit.
Honestly, I mean,
what do you want? Do you want a semi-well-produced Blumhouse movie, or do you want to watch Ouija Shark? No offense, Brett, but I mean, come on.
I'd rather watch Ouija Shark.
Yeah, exactly.
He knows way more entertaining.
Doing.
Yeah,
he's not pretending to make something that it isn't.
Yeah,
or can't live up to, which is also a strong suit of the Dirties. It is exactly what it needs to be.
Yeah,
and it just so works that this idea was able to permeate and still stay low budget to the point where the music licensing was almost 5 times what making the movie cost. And I mean, I don't know how you spend 10 grand on this movie other than like maybe transportation costs and like
the guns.
Well, that doesn't mean that they bought them wholesale. They could have,
but you probably have to
the
go
character
to
in the movie just borrowed them from
you
a
have to
relative.
go to a shooting range, and I think that costs.
I did have that question
it's not gonna cost
at first.
10,000. Yeah.
When I got to the ending and he has the guns in his kitchen and he's like, prepping for the shooting, I was wondering, I was like, how did he get those again? But then I realized that they all had the same like finish as the ones that they were shooting earlier. And I was like, oh, he probably just either knew where his cousin kept them or maybe his parents owned them, or
maybe his cousin's fine with lending him to him. Like he's a gun nut and he's like, But
we learn more about the camera people than we do his cousin throughout the entirety of this movie. His cousin is basically not a character.
Yeah, we don't need to,
which is fine.
He's a vehicle for them to get the guns, and that's fine.
Right, and maybe that is part of the social commentary of the movie, which is that like It's kind of like prohibition of alcohol, 100 years ago, which is that if people want something bad enough, they're going to get their hands on it, no matter how hard you try to keep it out of their hands. So,
and it could also be a
guns
statement on gun control, where it's like, yeah, you can prevent like certain people from getting access to guns, but what if they fucking know a guy who got the gun throughout, all the regular
right. But I also think this kind of predates most of that national conversation.
Probably.
Because again, they made this movie before even Sandy Hook. So gun control wasn't nearly as much of an issue when they made this movie. Even obviously Canada, there's basically only hunters and like maybe Mounties have them.
Yeah.
I don't know. I assume every cop in Canada is a Mountie with a hat and a red coat and a horse.
They're riding a
I just
moose.
assume that's all of them, and they all have goofy cartoon accents.
Yeah, that's not true, actually. It's a common misconception.
Wow.
Yeah, they ride moose, not horses. But
hey, speaking of moose, Kevin Smith, where the fuck is Moose Jaws?
Where is it?
You said you were gonna make it. You can much more easily make Moose Jaws than you can hit somebody. That's all I'm saying. All right. If there's one project you announce that needs to get finished, it's Moose Jaws, and it needs to be 1,000 times better than Clerks 3, which we will discuss on an upcoming episode of this show eventually.
Eventually. It'll be the last episode of this show. We won't make
How many
any more
times have
after.
we said that?
What that
it would be the last one we ever cover. Maybe that was only in our Facebook.
That could have been. I don't know if we've actually made it public, but yeah, we'll stop doing this show and we review Clerks 3.
Okay, anyway, everyone, we recommend the Dirties. I give it a 9 out of 10. I don't know what that last 1 out of 10 rating could be that brings it down.
It's just hard. It's hard to give a full 10 out of 10 because
it has to be like
That's
not for that one impossible angle on the cliffside.
There you go.
Give it a 10. No, but it's a great film, and I did not change my rating over a decade later, which I think speaks to its quality and its lasting, its ability to last in the eyes of the viewer. So we recommend the Dirties. I also recommend Operation Avalanche.
Yep.
I need to get into Nirvana, the band, the show. I'm not a true Matt Johnson fanatic, but I also recommend Blackberry, which came out last year and is a much easier movie to get your hands on than the other two, at least in terms of mainstream exposure. Those are all great films. Matt Johnson is a great director, and I can't wait to see what he does in the future. Even if he takes a back seat and starts directing more than acting, I still think that he has a lot to offer, and not just in the indie film world, but just in filmmaking in general. I actually would recommend, Jordan, I know you don't probably listen to any of these guys like YouTube videos, but they have a podcast called Sardonicast where it's like Adam from Your Movie Sucks and Alex from I Hate Everything, and they talk about either current movies or older movies. And one episode they talked about Orson Welles' documentary F for Fake, which starts out as a documentary, but then like towards the end of it just becomes complete fiction, although that's the trick of the movie. They did a whole podcast episode about that, and Matt was talking about how that movie really influenced a lot of the like cinematic language that he implements into his movies, and also like setting the audience up with a certain expectation and then either like delivering on it in a way they didn't expect or like completely twisting it and like kind of pulling the rug out from under their feet. So if you like the weird meta grayness that comes along with a movie like The Dirties or Operation Avalanche, even check out F for Fake. It's not like the best movie ever made, but it is like Orson Welles at his most unhinged in terms of like making a movie, I guess, because he was essentially inventing like the fast cut documentary with that movie and like the multimedia that comes along with it, and like just this sort of like vein of like, even in portraying documentary, there is still parts of making it that can be considered like similar to how you make a narrative film. Like, I'm sure there are shots in Michael Moore's movies that are staged only because it helps complete the movie and not because it actually happened, you know?
Of course.
So,
yeah.
F for Fake is like that, but cranked up to 11, but he was the first one that did it. I mean, it is a documentary, but it also isn't at a certain point. And that's what's interesting about it. And I mean, Orson Welles is also interesting just because he's made the greatest movie of all time and then spent the rest of his career trying to chase that while still making amazing works of art, but not really getting the appreciation he deserves. So hopefully Matt Johnson doesn't have a similar trajectory. It seems like we're at a point where that's not an issue.
Yeah.
I will say that I'm glad to see he is advanced as a director. But again, we started off the podcast by talking about how maybe the amateurishness of how this is made is part of the story of the film within the film, or it's all so confusing. I can't lay it out. So before I break my brain, let's wrap it up. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.
We'll be back next month with a special guest for an interview and a movie heretofore be determined.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it'll be Jordan's choice then, but it doesn't really matter, I guess. But anyway, that's going to do it. Go watch the Dirties. Go watch all of Matt Johnson's stuff. And Matt, if you're listening, we appreciate you.
We
and
love
please
you.
come on the podcast so we can talk about everything. And I'm just going to keep bloviating until this episode is 2 hours long. How does that sound, Jordan?
How close are we to that?